Welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us today for the Beating Burnout and Keeping the Joy webinar hosted by HCET with presenter Courtney Brame. My name is Bailey Schroeder. I'm a training manager here at HCET and I will be moderating the webinar today. Let me first briefly introduce you to healthcare education and training. HCET's mission is to provide comprehensive program development, education, and training to improve reproductive and sexual health outcomes. HCET is an organization of passionate people who are proactive in their belief that access to evidence-based, medically accurate reproductive and sexual health education, training, and care is a fundamental right. So this webinar has closed captioning available. To enable that on your screen, just click the live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Then you can click show subtitle, and then you can change any of the settings you need to there, turn them on and off. Awesome. So for more information and to keep up to date with HCET events, please be sure to follow HCET on these various social media platforms and visit our website at hcet.org. Okay, so we're going to go through a few housekeeping information before we get started. So a link to complete the event evaluation will be sent to you after this training. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. Archived presentations and a list of upcoming events can be viewed on our website. If you have any technical difficulties today during this presentation, you can either use the chat function to message me, or if you're outside of the Zoom window, you can email me at the email there on your screen. All right, so no one with the ability to control content of this activity has a relevant financial relationship to disclose with an eligible company. So throughout the presentation today, we encourage you to send any and all of your questions via the chat box and also the Q&A function. So you can send your questions anytime throughout the presentation. We will just most likely be holding all of the questions till about 15 minutes at the end. But if a question comes up throughout the presentation, you don't have to wait to send it to us. We'll just collect them all and then have Q&A at the end. All right, so now I would like to introduce you to our presenter for today. Courtney Brame started the nonprofit organization Something Positive for Positive People in 2017 after being diagnosed with herpes as a support resource for people struggling with suicidal ideation related to sexually transmitted diseases. The organization's podcast features interviews with people diagnosed with an STD as a way of teaching others how to navigate stigma, ranging from diagnosis care to disclosure. The organization exists now as primarily a sexual health communication platform with an emphasis on STD minimization, alleviating and dissolving stigma directly at the intersection of sexual health and mental health through advocacy for anti-stigmatization, identity-affirming, sex-positive healthcare. All right, so without further ado, I will be turning things over to Courtney. So you can take it away.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. I am going to go ahead and share one of my screens here. There we go. So if you see me looking away from the camera and up there, it's because I got notes happening up there as well. All right. I want to welcome everybody to Self-Care Strategies to Minimize Burnout. Bailey gave me a great introduction And I want to give you all a little bit of a grounding exercise just to sort of check in with your body, see where you are emotionally, mentally, energetically, so that we can have this sort of framework to work with as we go throughout the presentation, and we're able to just know where we are, what it is that we need for ourselves to take care of ourselves throughout the time that we're going to be on the screen. Okay. So I want to ask that you, if you are in a safe environment where it's just you and you feel comfortable doing so, please go ahead and lower your eyelids close together, looking at your eyelids. Or if your eyes are squinted open, you can just gaze downward toward your keyboard. And on your next exhale, see if you can empty out the breath, breathing out through your nose. And once you feel that empty feeling in your lungs, go ahead and take a big inhale, breathing in through the nostrils. Feel your posture shift, your spine lengthen, the crown of your head reach up toward the ceiling. Feel the belly expand. And once you get to the peak of that inhale, pause for 3, 2, 1, and then open mouth exhale, sighing it all out. Take another inhale, slowly breathe in, feel the belly protrude forward, ribs lift. Once you get to the peak of the breath at the top of the throat, take a pause, 3, 2, 1, and exhale. And allow yourself to continue that pace of breathing, and just notice how different it is compared to how you normally breathe. Are the breaths lengthier? Are they shorter? Do you find it challenging to pause at the top? Do you find yourself wanting to breathe before you complete the exhalation? Check in, and without making any judgments, just allow yourself to observe objectively how your breathing differs here than in your day-to-day life. And if throughout the presentation today you notice that perhaps you're holding your breath, or perhaps you are breathing really fast, take that as an opportunity to ask yourself, what do you need? Let's take one more deep inhale. And as you exhale, sigh it out. Begin to slowly flutter your eyes open, just blinking, beginning to gaze at the screen. I won't have us do any movement exercises in case anyone's like a rolly chair, but I invite you to bring your gaze down to the bottom left corner of your screen, just maybe at the outer edge of whatever device you're watching this webinar on. And as you inhale, draw your gaze up the left side of your screen from the bottom left corner to the top left corner. And once your gaze hits that corner, pause, and then exhale, dragging your eyelid or your gaze across the screen from the top left side to the top right side. Pause, and then inhale, allow for your gaze to travel down the outer right side of your device. And then exhale, making your way back to where you started. And try to not move your head when you do this. It's hard for me. And now we'll reverse that. Take an inhale as you bring your gaze across the bottom of your device, going over to the right. And then take your exhale as you bring your gaze up. Inhale, traveling across to the top left. And exhale as you are traveling down to where you started. Take one more deep breath in. And exhale, sigh it out. All right, this is something that you'll be able to just tap into if at any point throughout the presentation you're finding that your eyes are getting tired, And this is also a moment for you to be able to check in with your breath. Okay. All right. So here's an overview of today's presentation. We just completed the grounding exercise. Next, we'll go into a little bit more of an introduction so that I can kind of bridge the gap in connection and connecting what it is that I do with Something Positive for Positive People, my organization, and how that's relevant to you all's work as disease intervention specialists. Next, we'll talk about burnout, and then we'll go into integrated self-care. We'll be explaining that, and then it'll be a closing. So this is a very brief presentation. I'm not one who's real big on slides, so I very much just like to have an engaging dialogue. So if at any point you have anything to contribute, I invite you to utilize the chat, as I'll be asking a few questions to get perspective of your personal experience with burnout and self-care as we go through this presentation. All right, so I'm Courtney Brame. I have a lot of titles that happen to have emerged since 2020. With the pandemic, I had a lot of free time on my hands, and I want to acknowledge that while many of us have experienced a lot of loss throughout, whether it be opportunities, things, people, relationships, there have been things that were gained as well. So for myself, I was able to more so condense a lot of the work that I do into titles to very easily communicate what it is that I do for people and through Something Positive for Positive People. So I'm a herpes education and sexual health advocate, mental health service agent, and I'll get into more of that on the next slide describing the organization. I host the podcast interviewing people who are living with herpes about their experiences from diagnosis to disclosure, as well as healthcare providers about what the barriers are for them to be able to provide the level of sexual health care and education that they feel they could. I am essentially an investigative journalist on the topic of sexual health and mental health stigma. I am also a 500-hour certified yoga instructor, online public speaker, as well as sex educator. All right. So Something Positive for Positive People is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. In short, it's self-help for people with herpes. That is the most simple way that I can put it. It began with, I want to say that my journey really started this off because I never really recognized what I needed after I was diagnosed with genital herpes in 2013 until 2017, actually. So that's really where the introspection began for me to identify what things I needed, where I was with my diagnosis, how I viewed myself. And that led to me finding support groups. And these support groups were not very supportive. There was really a lot of sort of contests to see who had it worse, I would say. For many people, it was, oh, I was diagnosed and this is what happened. It's the worst thing that happened to me. And then other people being like, well, at least it wasn't this way. And you can insert a worst case scenario than the previous shared bad case scenario. And there was just a lot of negative cycles of stigma. A common thing that was said is that my life is over. And while on one hand, there's my life is over, there's, oh, I could die over this. And then there is, I am going to end my life because of this. And I started to really see that there was a difference between the two. I noticed that there were people who openly would express on these forums and support groups that there were people that they wanted to end their lives for various reasons, whether it be that they thought that they wouldn't have sex again, they thought that no one would ever love them, they thought they wouldn't be able to have children. And I learned that there was such an interconnectedness between one's sexual identity and their identity, like their sexuality and their identity were very, very interconnected to the point where once someone received their herpes diagnosis, they didn't know who they were anymore. So I began thinking that suicide ideation was really about a loss of control. And over time, through this experiment or through these interviews that I had started conducting, I learned that it was really about identity invalidation. So people had a sense of a loss of identity, and the loss of that identity was just continuing to be validated because they didn't know who they were. So how could they communicate this to people who did know who they were, for them to be able to have that reassurance? And as I talk about identity here so much, as we get into the end of the presentation, that'll make more sense why that's so important, especially for burnout and self-care. So another aspect of something positive for positive people is its post-diagnosis support. We've had more than 20,000 people regularly checking into the podcast, at least, for the support that it has supplied to people. We're now at more than 300 podcast episodes since 2017. It's been a weekly podcast featuring interviews. It's available on all listening platforms. If you listen to podcasts, you'll be able to find it. Something positive for positive people. We've developed a community on social media, especially Instagram, with a following of 8.7 thousand people, which says a lot more than what that number actually represents, considering how prevalent stigma is for people and how difficult it is for people to become associated with something that is as stigmatized as herpes. So it's great that there are people who are open to following and receiving and sharing the information that's being provided through this platform. I've been active in dozens of herpes support groups across the USA, and connecting people into these groups to get that sense of community, as well as support that they have needed throughout the course of wherever they are with their own diagnosis. And finally, getting to the mental and sexual health advocacy. I have made it to where we're able to connect people with a therapist if they are struggling with herpes stigma, in a way that is donation based. There have been more than 50 people who've gone through therapy since 2020 or 2020, not 2020. And while we work with licensed mental health professionals to support our clients, that specifically need support through the herpes diagnosis, there are also other aspects of the organization, such as yoga, and being able to utilize that not only for themselves, but even people who are in the advocacy space, who do similar work to myself, and disease intervention specialists. We speak about how yoga can be utilized, not just in the sense of hopping on your mat, doing some stretches and breathing exercises, but also with being able to just check in with yourself. Am I beginning to feel burnt out? Am I beginning to experience compassion fatigue? These are some of the questions that you can ask. Yoga is a very powerful vehicle to identify where you are, so that you can give yourself what it is that you need in order to not fall into the point of no return, so to speak. And then, yeah, we speak about, or through this, identity validation and community are a major part of what something positive for positive people does. Before I click onto the next slide, I want to invite people to type into the chat what you think burnout is. So I'll give it about 15 to 20 seconds before I click onto the next slide, where I have a definition listed for us already. Think about how you've experienced burnout in your personal life. Think about it in your professional life, or if it's been in social settings. How does it feel in your body? Where do you notice the feeling of burnout? Is it in your chest? Do you find it to emerge in your shoulders? Do you find that your knees buckle a bit to keep you from being able to take any action forward? So we got not caring, shutting down, just going through the motions, more headaches. Thank you for sharing that, because headaches for sure. Feeling overwhelmed, increase in every disease condition. How can we keep handling this? All right. So going to the next slide, we have, there we go. All right, so I found this definition on Google, of course. That's where we find everything. Burnout is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. It occurs when you feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and unable to meet constant demands. So when I speak about utilizing yoga as a way of identifying, checking into where you are, what I think is important to note here is, according to the definition that we have here, that yoga is not necessarily a solution to burnout. It is a tool to check in to see if you are experiencing symptoms of becoming burnt out. So it's a way to check in with your stress levels. There are always going to be some sort of stressors in our lives, and yoga is a way of acknowledging if it's too little or too much. So if we're not having a healthy amount of stress, so to speak, then what we're looking at is boredom, essentially, or like a need to do something. And there could even be the uh, overwhelm of just feeling like something needs to be done, but there's just nothing to do. And then on the other hand, the excessive side of that, so if we are feeling too overwhelmed, that too can be paralyzing. And we feel like we need to do something about that, but there's nothing to be done. What I believe yoga does for us is allow for us to regularly just check in with ourselves to see if we're too high or too low. And from there, what we'll find are some self care strategies in order to regulate us back to where our baseline is and where we need to be. So at the beginning of this presentation, I ask that everyone take that moment to breathe and, sort of recalibrate yourself and compare how your breathing when it was conscious and intentional was to when you're just breathing in and out throughout the day. For myself, I notice that there are moments in the day where I'm just not breathing. And then when I start breathing again, I'm like, and it's a lot faster to catch up. So in these moments, I'm exerting a lot more unnecessary stress on myself and I need to come down. So this is a regular thing for me that I have to often check in with myself, with my body, especially throughout my workday, where I am often engaged in conversations with people, where I'm listening to people who are struggling with a diagnosis, maybe some mental health stuff, or needing support through a disclosure, or just trying to figure out how to navigate the healthcare space and find useful information. So I believe that there's a little bit of a parallel there between how I experience this high stress and how you all may experience high stress with just wanting to help and be supportive to the people that we serve and not even realizing that maybe we're in need of some of our own support via a check-in periodically. And when we don't allow for ourselves to regularly check in, this is when we begin to maybe lose our breath, if you will. And that has long-term effects on the body as well that we do not have time to get into through this presentation. So on the next slide, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a video. And this video is a little bit more than 4 minutes, and it speaks to the utilization of yoga for a specific career field. So first responders, it's yoga for first responders. And it specifically is connected. She does a much better job of explaining it than I will explain in the video. But the overall intention for me sharing this is to give you the idea of how the utilization of yoga specific to our career fields can be useful to us. So we'll see it apply to first responders. And then I want you to sort of envision what this could look like for you and how useful it could be as well as we watch it. Right. I think I'm old. Nobody saw that. Okay, I am going to exit out of here. One sec. I'm going to stop sharing my screen before I give away the presentation. All right. Does anyone have anything else to contribute to our comments around burnout so far? Is there anything that stands out to you? Is there anything that you all want to share about how burnout shows up for you, whether it be in the workplace or at home? Feel free to share.
Courtney, I have the video showed up. Do you want me to pull it up?
Please.
Yep, I'm on
Yes.
it.
Yeah, thank you. Wouldn't be a Zoom meeting without technical difficulties, would it?
Like soldiers on the battlefield, the nation's first responders can experience extreme stress, a routine part of their jobs. And those encounters take a toll. Well, one woman saw the problem and found a unique way to help. Her nonprofit, Yoga for the First Responders, teaches mental, physical, and emotional resilience through the practice of yoga. Barry Peterson shows us how it's helping our heroes.
When crisis strikes, Superman is the ultimate first responder. He is always calm. And that is Yoga Lesson 1 for real first responders.
You don't see his shoulders up, and you don't see this short, fast breath. No matter what's going on, Superman has the chest up and is calm breathing. And that's representative of power.
You'll find yoga teacher Olivia Mead with unusual students, firefighters in full gear.
Inhale, upward facing dog. Exhale, downward facing dog. Good, take a couple breaths.
Or trainees to become sheriff's deputies in Denver, Colorado.
So we have to stay focused and concentrated in this moment to be ready for anything.
They are learning the Superman lesson. Control your breathing to stay calm, and you stay in control.
When you're in a threat response where your survival is at stake, you're not always making the best or most accurate decisions. You're just trying to survive.
Olivia founded a nonprofit called Yoga for First Responders and crisscrosses the country teaching yoga to police and firefighters.
Inhale, drop it out. You know how to grab your weapon, you know how to talk to people, you know how to use your body. Same thing with the yoga. It's going to happen automatically because you've trained for it beforehand.
This is now a mandatory class at the Training Academy for Denver County Sheriff's deputies. Deputies who work in the jails are unarmed, dealing with prisoners who may have mental health or drug problems or be angry about being in jail. Trouble explodes fast, says Denver County Sheriff Patrick Furman.
It may be inmates fighting with one another. It may be an inmate going through crisis that they've got to somehow interact with and intervene with.
How important is calm when you're dealing with this?
It's critical. I mean, you know, if you go into a crisis situation and you're not calm, you're going to escalate that situation.
There is another need. Once the fire is out or the SWAT team is finished, first responders must deal with what they saw and did. For that, yoga can be a vital alternative, says Captain Anthony Gettler, who commands the Training Academy.
So there has to be a way for them to process that stress.
When you control the breath, you're controlling your mind.
And to be able to decompress without using other means.
Like alcohol or stuff like that.
In this line of work, there's alcoholism and there's high suicide rates, so we want to give people a different alternative.
Is there a preventative quality to yoga for these first responders?
Yes, and I think practicing it proactively is where we're most effective. That's why I love teaching in the academy. I'm in control. I am in control.
Which means what they master now may pay off for years to come. For CBS This Morning, Saturday, Barry Peterson, Denver.
We can cut it off now. They're about to just talk. All right. Thank you so much, Bailey. All right. I'm going to pull my presentation back up. Okay. Okay. So speaking to that video, what I want to invite you to do is just like envision how you might become stressed in a workday in a variety of ways, whether that be something that brings you up or bring you down. And what I mean by that is how I was referencing where our baseline is. And if we're feeling a little bit low and we need to be energized, that's one way that yoga helps us for us to be able to see that as a need for ourselves. And the same way at the inverse, if we're like, let's say angry, anger is a very high intensity emotion that is also stressful. So how can we come down from that? if something just happened, if there was a disagreeable patient, client, uh, coworker even. We need to be able to bring ourselves back to what our baseline is so that we can continue to maintain that Superman calm. Another point that I want to highlight here is while they mentioned high suicide rates, not to say that that couldn't be a thing with our community here, but we have the after effects of the long-term effects. So we're looking at being burnt out and then how that can show up as well in our day-to-day lives if we're not taking care of ourselves. And what I mean by taking care of ourselves is, as you can imagine, we're going to transition into that self-care portion of this presentation. So before I move forward, I invite you to share in the chat what you believe self-care is. What are some examples of how you practice self-care? And I ask because in my experience, what I've seen self-care to be has consistently been something like scrolling through social media is a perfect example. I see some toes under a faucet with bubbles in the tub, a wine glass in one hand, phone in the other, and then it's like hashtag self-care, and that's been something that is not necessarily exclusively what self-care is. There are various components of self-care and how it shows up for each of us and what opportunities we have in order to access it. So what I want to do is give you the tools and some information to help you redefine self-care outside of the context that you may have access to at this point. So we'll go on to the definition of self-care. All right, described by the World Health Organization. They describe self-care as the ability of individuals, families, and communities, that's a big important part here, to promote health, prevent disease, maintain health, and to cope with illness and disability with or without the support of a healthcare provider. So here we can see how the utilization of a tool to simply check in with yourself as a preventative care or a preventative tactic for the utilization of self-care. So if you go through your check-in, if you find that you are breathing fast, what tools do you have? That's where we get into self-care. So yoga in itself is not self-care. It's a tool to identify the type of self-care that is needed. And what we'll find as we get to the end of the presentation is that more of what self-care is has to do with boundaries, so to speak. And that too is like a whole hour long discussion. So I'll briefly touch on that. But based on this definition, we have self-care as a way of preventing burnout, preventing the long-term effects of burnout, as well as additional stressors. And self-care is something that can be practiced individually, but I find it to be so much more impactful when we're able to engage in self-care collectively as a community, when we have people around us who are able to say, hey, you're not yourself today, or how are you? Have you eaten? Have you showered? Have you done anything that you enjoy? Have you done anything that brings you peace? Have you done any of these things, or have you been so busy practicing other care? Like that's something I literally just said out loud for the first time, but where you are prioritizing the care of others at the expense of yourself. So we're going to break down self-care into a way that I think allows for us to not exclusively look at it as something external to us, but more of our own ability to respect and honor ourselves and do so with boundaries around the things that can potentially burn us out.
Courtney, we cannot see your screen. I think you need to
Oh,
screen share.
okay. How long has this been going on?
Just while you're talking about self-care, not long, don't worry.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Okay. All right, so the definition of self-care, probably where, okay. I was wondering why I couldn't see the chat either. Okay. Remove this. And all right, slideshow. 1 second. And current slide. And I need to flip these. All right. Put that down. So that was a definition of self-care. We got that. And now we're breaking down the definition of self-care as self and care. So your sense of who you are, deep down, your identity, put simple, the being of a person. So identity is a big key phrase here. And the word care is described as serious attention or consideration applied to doing something correctly with one R, my bad, or to avoid damage or risk. So when you all see self-care, how do you see it when it's broken down as simply as this? There are two main things that really stick out to me, and it's more of the word identity as well as attention. So attention to your identity, or even awareness of your identity, because taking it back to a lot of the people that we support, if we're dealing with people who are struggling with an STI diagnosis, or we're having to support them through that in a variety of ways, then what we're looking at is identity invalidation because of their sexuality being such a core part of their identity. How many more aspects of who we are exist when we actually bring our attention to who we are rather than what we do or what we can do for another person or other people. In the places that we show up in our community, or the ways that we show up in our community. All right, before I go to the next slide, I want y'all to get your cameras ready, be ready to screenshot. This one's gonna be very useful because it really does explore various places to practice self-care. So right now in the chat, if you want, I invite you to list different places that you can practice self-care. So these can be in a variety of social settings without me giving too much of it away. It can be at the workplace. It can be around family members. It can be around extended family, in-laws. It can be with your pets. How do you, what are some places that you are able to exercise self-care? All right. So we're looking at self-care here as identity care or identity awareness, identity attention, but we are looking for ways to prioritize and bring our attention to the other aspects of our identities, not just in relation to our workspace, not just in relation to our relationships to other people. So without going through each of these thoroughly all the way through, I want for you all to you can type in the chat, or you can just think to yourself, what are some examples of how physical, emotional, social, spiritual, personal, spatial, financial, and work spaces, like how do these places stress you? And what are some self-care practices that you can utilize in these settings in order to support yourself, in order to get yourself back to your baseline? Again, yoga being the tool to check in to see exactly where you are and identify what you need in order to get to where you need to be. So if you're on 10 being high intensity anger and a rage, checking in with yoga may not be as impactful if you are regularly checking in with yourself to identify when you're taking off to that point so that you can come down. And if you find yourself losing attentiveness, losing focus or motivation at all, how can you check in through yoga to bring yourself back up? These are all different spaces where these emotions can be experienced, where this high stress can come from. So looking at sleep as a recalibration self-care strategy in order to minimize burnout, that's one example. If your body is calling for something and it's just tight. If you have like slouched shoulders for being at the keyboard, maybe you need to expand your chest a bit and bring your arms behind you. Maybe you just need to stretch out your fingers. Ooh, you hear that popping? Maybe your body is calling for some type of movement. Maybe your stomach is screaming at you and you just need to simply eat something. And when we go to the emotional side, all of this is essentially stress management. Again, there's healthy stress, and then there is the intense stress, and then the kind of stress where it's just too little and we feel bored. What are some boundaries that we can put around ourselves or around these spaces, these opportunities for self-care, so that when we enter them, we're able to fully be present with them and see these as necessary strategies of preserving our energy, our ability to not burn out. So again, I won't go through each and every one of these, but two in particular that don't really get talked about are boundaries around our space, our personal space. So does your space validate who you are? Are you someone who at home, if you are generally a clean person and you like having things very much organized and you kind of lose it when something's out of place, you like knowing where everything is at a given point in time, so where you can just like tell someone exactly where something is and they can find it right away? I've never been the person who can find things right away, even with directions. So that was irrelevant. But how do you feel in the space that you live in? Is it supportive to who you are? I personally am very minimalistic. My space being where I have exactly what I need to do what I need to do, and the necessities, I'm fine. That is validating to me. If I had like decorations on my walls and posters, I would feel cluttered. So every time I come home, that would be the kind of anxiety I get. I would feel almost crippling sensation to where it's like, oh, I don't really like this here. But then without having any boundaries in place for taking care of myself in a setting that I don't like being, or where there are things that aren't validating to my identity as a minimalistic person, that is going to, if I had boundaries, I would be able to utilize yoga to just go right into practicing whatever the self-care is that I need, which would be getting rid of that thing. Do you feel safe in your home? What do you need for safety? Because where we spend the most of our time, especially at home in our personal space, it needs to be a place that re-energizes us, because there are so many of these things to where our attention is in these places, and it's very easy to burn out in these ways, and we don't even know it, y'all. We spend a lot of our time at work or getting ready for work or leaving work, and we think that a lot of what our burnout or compassion fatigue comes down to is how our workday was. Yes, that's where we spend a good amount of time and focus. However, there are all these other components as well. How many of us have friends that make us feel burnt out or just drained after we interact with them, right? Are there moments where, even on the internet, on social media, where we feel super motivated and inspired, and we're at a high, and then we try and carry that into another interaction or something where it's just not a fit, and we find ourselves perhaps unable to sleep? So all of these things sort of play into one another. So it's important to be able to break down the different areas where self-care can be practiced, where it is necessary in order for us to recalibrate ourselves to whatever our baseline is. Because you might just naturally be a high energy, high functioning person, and whenever you're down from that, you have to do things a little bit different than someone who's always fairly stoic or calm, in order to get to what your baseline is. So I want to bring our attention over to the right side now. I spent a lot of time on the left, my apologies. But identity awareness, identity exploration, identity expression. So being able to be aware of these various categories where care is needed, where stress can happen, and then being able to just align our beliefs with our behavior. Are we Do we believe that we're the kind of person who needs time alone? Have we been giving ourselves that? Are we actively engaging in social interactions at an imbalance of what our capacity is? So if I need more of my alone time, but I keep going out and socializing, then that's going to burn me out, not just socially, but also within myself, like who I believe myself to be. This is draining to my identity. And when we look at identity exploration, it's a matter of learning what it is that we do and don't enjoy. Do more of what we do enjoy, less of what we don't enjoy. And whenever there's that conflict between, all right, I'm going to do this thing, but I don't like it, and that can add up. The more that we do things that we don't want to do, but we make ourselves feel like we have to do, the easier it is for us to compile that stress and then begin to burn out in the workplace. So for so much of this, our identity is so much of the self-care is really revolving around our identity. And even with the financial piece, like how we spend our money is validated to our identity. You know, so if we are in, we like to shop. Let's say shopping is a big thing. You know, this is something that is supportive to me. If I want to purchase things that enhance my space, make me feel good spiritually, enhance my ability to manage my stress, and allows for me to sleep better at night. All of these things really interconnect in allowing for us to best take care of ourselves by supporting our identity. So being able to explore ideas about what validates us and being able to do so in safe settings where there are other people who are aware of the importance of self-care as well. This is how we build that community, a community of identity affirming people. This is it's self-care on, oh, I don't want to say self-care on steroids. This is an exponentially more impactful form of self-care when we can practice this exploration within community. And then identity expression, having the safety and confidence to express your internal beliefs through your behaviors. So if I'm someone, especially as long as this isn't impeding on anyone else's personal space and their values and beliefs are illegal and it's consensual, right? So to be able to express yourself, maybe some of us like to sing, maybe some of us like to create, we may like to make clothing, maybe art. There are various ways for us to express ourselves that often are neglected because we may be feeling burned out in a lot of these other spaces. So the ability to express ourselves, our identity, in the way that is suiting to us can be not only energizing to ourselves, but also for the community because it's contagious. When you see somebody else doing a thing that they are great at or that makes you feel good, it inspires you to want to utilize your gifts in order to make others feel good as well. So I encourage people to jot this down, take pictures, and just journal around what self-care looks like in each of these different categories, as well as what burns you out in each of these categories. So these are all different strategies and ways that or tools that we can utilize as well to bring our energy back up or back down in order to recalibrate to whatever our baseline is. This is a really good point for us to go through the Q&A. I'm going to check the chat real quick. We got working too often, we're treating ourselves to Starbucks between field visits. Okay, so we got some self-care strategies here, as well as burnout symptoms. Working too often on the computer is one thing. And then making sure that you're moving your body every day is a form of self-care. Okay, so are there any questions at all about anything here, burnout wise, self-care wise, or even this idea of identity care. It's been something that I have seen emerge again and again with speaking to people who are navigating an STI diagnosis. A perfect example is early on when I was newly diagnosed, there was a support group for people with herpes. And there was a gentleman who posted to the page, "This is it, I'm gonna do it. I can't take it anymore." And it was just like, I don't want to be here. And I just happened to have scrolled and seen that it was very recently posted. So I reached out to one of the admins of the group and asked, "Hey, what's being done? Are you all contacting anyone, family? I don't know if there's like a Facebook thing." And I remember her saying, "We're trying to get together to figure out what to do." And to me, there was just such a I don't know what that process would have been. And I've had experience with people who threatened suicide in the past, and if there was no action taken, who knows what would have happened. But in this case, I went to his Facebook page and I scrolled through and just kind of got an idea of what his life has been like, what he's posted, what's going on. And I noticed that there was a period where a few weeks had gone by where he wasn't posting videos of himself playing the guitar. And so I listened to it a little bit. I was like, "Oh, it's really good." And I went through a couple of other videos, and all the while, like I sent the chat message and just asked, "Hey, I noticed that you are really good at playing the guitar, and you haven't been playing in a while. What's going on?" And he went into what was stressing him out, his relationship, and just I felt like he just really needed to not only vent, but to be seen in who he is as a person, as a artist, as a musician. These were ways that I was able to validate his identity just with that simple observation. Now, the conversation got more lighthearted, and there were some other things that were going on with him, but ultimately he ended up getting back to playing the guitar. He made a few more posts later. I've since lost contact, and a lot of people who are in these support groups, they make up different names, so it's hard to keep up with who's who just for their privacy and anonymity. So I don't know where he is now, but I remember for a while I was able to see that he was still playing the guitar. He got back into playing his music and posting it on social media, and that's the end of that. And I share this story because in our work, very often we are like supporting people. We are helping people in ways that we may never be seen for. We may never really be thanked for. These people may not ever give us the sort of credit or the validation to our own identities as helpers or as people who are providing a service that is supportive to people who are in need. So we may never really get that validation from them. However, I'm so sorry. However, we this is that thing I was talking about, babe, where I look at the chat and I lose my train of thought. I felt like I was really going somewhere with that too. I'll come back to the chat in a second. But yeah, we have to support one another. You saw how in the video the first responders were in sync with having to with utilizing yoga to essentially check in with themselves, right? And this was a community-based function, a community-based way of checking in with themselves. And then having a supportive community means that you are consistently checking in with yourself. So it's not necessarily always about the practice of self-care. It's more about the practice of checking in with yourself. And this is something that could be a matter of and allow for that breath that you take, that snap that you do, or that stomp, or that clap, whatever you need to do to get into the mode of, all right, I'm checking in. And then be ready to deal with whatever it is that is coming up for yourself, and be able to utilize any of these tools and resources for yourself, or even if you make up some on your own, tailored to your experience and what's accessible and available to you. This is how we practice self-care as identity care and a way to minimize the potential for burnout. My name is Courtney Brame, and my website is Something Positive for Positive People. The abbreviation is spfpp.org. Here's my contact information if you'd like to connect with me. I am active on social media, on TikTok, and Instagram, and I say because I really hate that I have to be on there. But it's very important to have that kind of presence so that people can best connect with me, and I can share and exchange the resources necessary to support the people that I am hoping to actively be able to help. Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and get back to where we are.
All right, we only have a couple minutes left, but I wanted to make sure anybody who had a question sent them in. So if you have a last minute question for Courtney, please send it in the chat and we can attempt to get there.
I would like to acknowledge Jeremy's comment here too. We all use social media to help us in our investigations. However, we can't tell them that, but it can help us to guide our conversation based on what we may know prior to speaking to them. This speaks volumes to the experience that I just shared, as well as it's tricky for you all, and for me, like I have this freedom to where people are only contacting me through social media. So I have everything I need right there. And just based off of the interaction, like they are essentially consenting to me, going through and seeing what's going on in their lives. So I would be curious to know, without social media being the thing that you bring up to them, like what are some ways that you can get an idea of who a person is and who they are outside of this clinical setting, perhaps, that gives you what you need in order to validate their identity or see who they may be? And I guess maybe there isn't really an answer to this right now, but it's something to keep in mind as we are supporting people. And just like some people just need to be validated in that they are who they were prior to coming in for whatever treatment, diagnosis, or discussion that is going to take place.
Awesome. So we are at time. I think we have just 1 minute left, but I want to thank you, Courtney, for being here today with us. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm going to go to the next slide here. Awesome. And thank you guys, everyone who's attended. We really appreciate it. There will be an evaluation sent to you via email. And you can also scan this QR code here on the screen for the evaluation. One last thing before we take off, if you enjoyed today's presentation and would like to continue your learning, please consider visiting HCET Virtual Learning at learn.hcet.org. Other than that, thank you again to Courtney and all of you who have attended. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Bailey, for having me.